vice chairman leads those pastor search sessions.
And we all have been.
I'd like to take this chance to apologize.
You ought to have your bags packed and ready. You ought to not have your roots too deep.
You can focus on those things, but I think as Christians, we have to be intentional.
If you have gastrointestinal problems, hold a live puppy on your belly.
Right? If we're honest, all of us have done that.
Joining me now is Lisa Best. Lisa's not a stranger to Shady Grove Wesleyan Church. She is a licensed clinical mental health counselor. Good evening, Lisa. How are you?
I'm doing great, Dan.
I'm glad to have you on Shady Grove Radio tonight because I read an article recently, and I contacted you about that, about suicide among children and teens and the stress that is increased among children and teens during isolation and during the COVID issues and maybe some of the unrest around the country, some of the civic unrest. What have you observed? Have you seen an increase or have you seen more stress in children? What's been your experience?
Well, I was already seeing a lot of stress and anxiety with children and teens, probably more in the last 5 years than previous years. I've been in private practice for about 22 years. And so I think every year it increases. But since the pandemic, I've seen that the people who were really experiencing anxiety, it got a little worse. And then I think what I really saw were people that never experienced anxiety, all of a sudden were experiencing it for the first time.
What were you thinking when you heard the news that things are going to be shut down, that we're going to shelter in place, go into isolation, schools were let out? What were your thoughts heading into that from your profession as a counselor?
I think one of my biggest concerns was, what is this going to do for the children and teens who have some social anxiety? Is this going to set them back? And I do believe it did. What new issues are going to come up. And I'm pretty proactive. I'm very much glass is half full. So I started to think about what are some things that we can do during this time versus what are we not able to do. And that's just my personality.
So how bad is the problem? How bad is the anxiety, the suicide attempts, even the suicide among children and teens?
Yeah, so research has shown, a study was done between the years of 2007 and 2017, and the suicide rate among 15 to 17-year-olds increased 76% during that 10-year period. So the statistics based on 2017 were 12 deaths per 100,000 15 to 17-year-olds in the United States. So 12 per 100,000. And then for 10 to 14-year-olds, it was 2.5 deaths per 100,000. So there was a huge increase during that time. Of course, we don't really know what the statistics have been about suicide attempts or actual suicides during the pandemic. I personally have had one client, a teenager, that became my client after a suicide attempt during the pandemic. But I'll be honest with you, I think that attempt probably would have happened with or without the pandemic. There were things that were going on before that, and maybe the isolation pushed that client, that teenager, to make that attempt. I'm not sure, but I can't say that the suicide attempt was specifically because of isolation during the pandemic. But obviously, there are issues. One thing I've seen with students who have gone back to school, whether they've gone back to high school or college, is that they're experiencing some social anxiety that they never had before. So, and I even noticed that amongst my peers and even myself, when we were able to start getting together in groups again, it was almost like we didn't know how to talk to each other face to face. And so it's definitely had an impact.
Yeah, I was going to, you talked about a little bit about what social anxiety is just there. Tell me what social anxiety is.
Well, without giving like a formal definition, I would say like these are the teens who have a real hard time going to lunch. I tell people all the time, lunch period in high school, middle school tends to be one of the most stressful times of the day for most of my clients who are teenagers. Who am I going to sit with? Is there going to be a seat? What's going on? A lot of avoiding lunch. And I've even had some of my clients who are back in school, maybe in private school, and they're super stressed around lunchtime. So social anxiety would be, what do I look like? What are people going to think of me? Am I going to say the right thing? How am I going to talk? Those kinds of things.
If I'm a parent or a family member of a teen or a child, how do I look for signs of stress, anxiety, maybe even suicidal type activity or behavior? What do we look for?
Yeah, one of the biggest things in children would be when children regress back to behavioral issues that they haven't had in a while, like bedwetting, crying, constant irritability, uncontrollable crying, those kinds of things. With teenagers, I think it looks like kind of feeling hopeless, isolation. They're staying in their room a whole lot more. And you have to be kind of creative in filling this out, because teenagers right now, especially if they're doing school virtually, they're in their room or at the dining room table in front of a computer for a lot of hours during the day. And so you have to be talking to your kids. I have had some clients who I worked with in the past who have come back during this time because they just went to the pediatrician for a checkup. And, when you go to the pediatrician, you have a depression screening, and kids and teens are being really honest on that depression screening. It's raising a flag to the pediatrician, and then the pediatrician's talking to them about it and bringing the parent in. And I've had some parents who were like, well, I knew that maybe they were a little sad, but I didn't realize that it was as bad as it is. And so asking questions, communication is huge. So you can see changes in eating patterns, eating too much, putting weight on or not eating, sleep patterns being completely off, staying up all hours of the night, sleeping all day, having not a lot of motivation or energy. I think when you check your kids' grades, I've heard a lot of this, parents who have gone online and checked their kids' grades, and the kid's been saying, yes, I'm caught up on my homework, yes, I've done it, yes, I'm okay in my classes. But when the parent actually goes and looks online, they see that they're actually failing a class. And so I think we have to be much more active and engaged. Lack of attention, feeling worthless. I think if all of a sudden they're extremely self-conscious or really negative about themselves or feel worthless, if they're isolating themselves from their friends, all of those are kind of signs of depression. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're suicidal, but I think if we could catch depression and anxiety early on, and if we could give kids and teenagers tools to deal with their really heavy emotions earlier in life, I think we could avoid some suicide attempts.
I think you just an excellent description there to give us a picture of a child who might be stressed or a teen who might be stressed. But some of those things you described, I thought, well, that's teenage behavior. I guess for parents or for family, finding a child's personality is part of figuring out something's going wrong. Is that right? Or am I off base with that? If you have a quiet child, in other words.
Yeah, I think you have to know your kid. If your kid has been typically outgoing and social and now they're not, that's a red flag. If they're isolating themselves more, that's a red flag. But that's a good point, Dan. Like, if your kid is pretty quiet, it's going to take some work for you to get into what's going on with them, and to really know them, to be able to pick up any differences in their behavior. This is where I think communication really helps. Going on a walk, going on a drive. Sometimes, I know for me as a mom, my kids are older now, but as a mom of teenagers, we had the best conversations in the car. I don't know why, because they're stuck in the car with me. I'm not sure, but you just have to find that place where you can ask some really good questions.
It sounds like you're talking about a parent who kind of becomes an expert in who this person is as a teen.
Yes, and I think if we're talking about from a Christian perspective, I don't ever want to minimize the power of the Holy Spirit, and that God created our kid. He knows them and loves them better than we do. And so we can trust him to help us really know our kids and make us aware of things. Not always, but I think if you're going to be a student of your child, I'm going to absolutely be asking God to help me to see that child through his eyes.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to ask, do you see a difference in Christian teens and maybe teens that aren't Christians? Do you see a difference in the stress or how they handle the stress or what's going on in their life?
I think the stress might be the same. Maybe families are different, but even within Christian families, there can be a lot of stress. I think kids are stressed out by school and grades. I can't tell you how many times I've heard in the last week some real anxiety from Christian teens about making a bad grade. And say a seventh grader, when you really get down to it, what is your fear about making a bad grade on this test? And their fear is that they won't be able to get into a good college. In the seventh grade, that's their fear. So I think teens across the board are experiencing the same kinds of anxiety. Maybe parents are parenting differently. I don't know. I feel like as a Christian, I have access to a power that's bigger than me and understanding my kid. And I think when my kids were involved in a healthy youth group, then I had other adults that were pouring into their lives that I could trust. And maybe they were picking up on red flags that I wasn't picking up on. And but you don't have to be involved in a church to have your kids involved with other adults. And that would be actually one of the things that I would suggest is making sure that you have healthy adults involved in your kids' lives that they can talk to. If my daughter talks to a 25-year-old who I trust, then I'm fine with that because she's probably going to talk to her about things that she's not going to talk to me about. And I'm thankful to have people like that in her life. And when I was a teen, I had people like that in my life that I could share things with that I couldn't necessarily share with my parents.
What about busy parents? If you've got a parent who has to go to work in the morning, or it may be a single parent, but the child's going to be left alone, the teen's going to be left alone and not have an adult around, and it's going to happen on a daily basis. How can parents deal with that?
Yeah, and that's really hard because used to be that when they were in school in person, they were around people, around adults. You didn't have to worry about them as much as being home and being completely isolated. I think being really aware of what social media your kids are involved in or participating in, who their friends are, including their friends online. A lot of what's going on socially with teenagers right now is the people they're meeting online when they're playing video games. And so be very active and proactive in that. But I think for like a busy parent, especially a single parent with all of that, I think the number one thing that we can do is to take care of ourselves first. And a lot of times we put our kids first and we forget to take care of ourselves. And I always use the example of being on an airplane, when the flight attendant says, if we lose oxygen, this mask is going to come down. What are you going to do first? You're going to take the oxygen for yourself first, and then you're going to give it to the person that's sitting beside you. And I use that a lot. I think we can be so focused on our kids and everybody else that we're helping that we don't take care of ourselves. And, that stress comes out. Our stress comes out on other people. So I think one of the best things parents can do is to learn to deal with their own anxiety, their own stress and depression, stay healthy, and then that way you're in a better place to really help your kids. I think parents who are working full time and are not working from home have to get super creative in the evenings and the weekends to stay engaged with their kids. I'm not super great at that. And so I'm not going to say that it's easy, but it's necessary. I think we have to be really intentional. And perhaps that's when we have to ask other people to be involved as well, people that we trust, to spend time with our kids, whether it's a grandparent, an aunt or an uncle, or a mentor, a youth pastor, someone that we trust to help us. I think a lot of times parents don't ask for help.
How long does it take if my child is in counseling, if I've seen evidence of anxiety and stress and I'm concerned about it, how long does it take before they cross the finish line? Or is there a finish line? How long does this go?
You know what? I look at counseling as kind of across the lifespan. So I may meet a child when they're 10 years old, say their parents are going through a divorce, and the parents just want them to be able to work with a counselor. I'm going to establish a relationship with that child when they're 10. And we may work together once a week for a month and then go to every other week or once a month. And then I might not see that kid until they're 13. Now they're in middle school. There might be some bullying or some other issues with grades. They're going to come back and we're going to do a checkup. And I might work with them for 4 weeks, 2 months, something like that. And we just continue going on. And I literally am working with, because I'm old, I'm working with people that are in their 20s that I met when they were 10 years old. And I think that if we could understand that counseling is something that benefits our kids as kind of a preventative measure. So if I get my kids connected with a counselor early on, then when they have an issue 2 years from now, we just go back. In fact, one of my kids said to me, "Hey, Mom, can I go back and see my counselor? Could you help me schedule that?" And that child is an adult. And they don't see the counselor even once a year, but when they need them, they're there. And this is this person that I can trust as a parent, but already knows my kid's story. And so I don't think there's any my kid's experiencing anxiety and it's going to be 4 weeks. I think it depends on the kid. It depends on the parent. I think it's important to find a counselor that's going to do family counseling as well. And honestly, Dan, I found that a lot of teenagers, sometimes it's the parent that needs the counseling more than the teenager does. And I don't mean counseling as in they're severely depressed, but they just need some guidance in how to parent this teenager. And a lot of times the counselor can be the mediator between the two. I had a situation in the last couple of weeks where the parent thought the kid was wanting one thing. The kid obviously was telling me something different. And so I was able to help the teenager be honest with the parent. And so that just opened up doors of communication. That took away a lot of anxiety that the teenager was feeling and that the parent was feeling. Then they were able to come together and come up with a plan to deal with the issue. But without that mediator, they were just both assuming that the other one thought something that was not true.
Is there a way that a parent, if they see these anxiety signs in the children, they get concerned? Is there a way that the parent approaches the child that might be completely the wrong thing to do?
I think panicking and taking a teenager's phone away would be the absolute worst thing to do. I think we get really scared. And so we assume that everything's connected to the phone, everything's connected to social media or video games. And so we just want to take everything away and remove all the obstacles or all the issues that could be causing the anxiety or the depression. And to be honest with you, when you do that, it causes more anxiety and depression because now the teen has lost connection with the outside world. And I'm all for um, putting safeguards in place and limiting social media, even certain kinds for some students, or the amount of time for some students. But social media and phones, in my opinion, are here to stay. And restricting a teenager from them completely just increases the anxiety, when really what we need to be doing is teaching them how to handle social media, phones, video games, all of those things. Now, in a rare case, maybe you need to limit all video games for a child that has like an addictive personality, and it's just, or, maybe they've gotten themselves into really big trouble and you need to limit it all for a certain amount of time, like a grounding period. But I think the worst thing that parents can do is to swoop in and put like the child in in a prison. I think it just makes it worse.
So you've seen families, I'm sure, children they were in a nosedive, and you saw them improve and come out of that to some extent. Do you have any stories about that? Can you tell me something encouraging for a parent out there?
Yeah, I understand I'm a counselor, and so it makes sense that I would be pro counseling. But even in my own kids' lives, I've seen that when they've gone through hard times, when they've been able to talk to someone outside of our family, someone that I trust, then they learn what is causing the anxiety or the depression. What can I change? How much of this is about me and my choices? And then they begin to learn techniques to manage their anxiety. Something as simple as learning how to do deep breathing will absolutely teach a 7-year-old how to calm down in any situation. There are all kinds of techniques. And of course, you can learn that from a counselor. You can Google things, you can read books. We have a wealth of information. But I think it's really just starting somewhere and empowering or equipping kids and teens to deal with their anxiety. I work with adults who never learned to express their feelings. I literally have to get out a feeling game with words of different feelings, because all they know to say is that they're angry. That they're angry, they're happy, they're sad. And those are the only feelings they know. And so we have adults walking around who never really learned how to process their feelings or deal with anxiety or depression. And I'm super proud of the kids and the teens that I work with, because they want to learn. They don't want to feel the way they feel. They don't want to attempt suicide. They really do want to live. They just don't have the tools to be able to get themselves out of this black hole. And I think as parents, we have the responsibility to look outside of ourselves for help if we are not able to teach kids how to do that. But I think even as a parent, if we learn how to do it, we can lead by example. So for instance, if we are super annoyed by COVID restrictions, I can just tell you this. I know a parent's political views and their views on whether or not it's stupid to wear a mask based on what my clients are telling me, because they sound just like their parent, you know? And so we have to be really careful. I'm all about being honest with our kids and all of that. But if we are super negative and stressed out about what's going on with the pandemic, our kids are going to be super negative and stressed out. So I think it starts with us.
So the bottom line, you have hope for struggling families, for struggling kids. Am I right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What's the bottom line advice that you would give parents regarding stressful children and children who are really struggling? Maybe it's not because of isolation. Maybe it's because of other things. But what would be the bottom line statement you would give, a couple of sentences that you would give to parents at this point?
Yeah, I think bottom line, if you want to help your kid, you help yourself first. And especially if you are a Christian, do the work. Allow God to work in you. You know, why are you stressed? Why are you depressed? How do you handle difficult situations, what's coming out of your mouth and your body language. I think if we do our own work, we are much better equipped to help our kids. Beyond that, I think it's really important to make sure that our kids have seen a pediatrician. A lot of children experience depression and anxiety, adults as well, when really they're just lacking something in their body. There is a connection between vitamin D levels, or especially among anybody. If your vitamin D is low, you're going to feel depressed, and you're probably going to experience some anxiety. Well, before we get on a prescription medication, which I'm not opposed to prescription medication, but before we get on a prescription medication, let's just go to the doctor and have some blood work done and a full physical. Let the pediatrician, the primary care doctor, really do a full evaluation, because I've had clients who actually will get on a quality vitamin D and their depression lifts. And so I think it's important to look at the whole person. But my bottom line advice for parents would be do your own work first, and then ask for help. There are lots of people, counselors, pastors, youth pastors, children's pastors, mentors, coaches, teachers that want to come alongside of you and help you. And if you don't have them, I think you have to ask God for them. I have this great story. I was a little bit upset in the last month, because I have a daughter who is 17, and I feel like I've spent my life investing in girls and young adult women. And I got a little angry with God and said, where are the women who could be giving back and investing in my daughter? And I had, one 20-something girl that was investing in her, but I didn't see anybody else investing in her. And I really felt like God said, you haven't asked me for that, Lisa. You're just complaining that you don't have it. Because I knew she needed someone other than me. I had that growing up. And so I was kind of irritated that she didn't have anybody investing in her. And so I felt like God said, you need to pray and ask me for this. And I did. And out of the blue, which we know it wasn't a coincidence, she met a new friend where she was working. And that friend and her family began to invest in my daughter in a way that I can't right now. And it's a beautiful thing. So now I not only have a great friend for my daughter, but I have this other woman who is investing in my daughter, and she's on my team. And so I think a lot of times we have to really ask God to bring people into our kids' lives that we can trust, that can invest in them and be a part of our team. Stop trying to do it all by ourselves.
Thank you for your time, Lisa. Lisa Best, licensed clinical mental health counselor and friend of Shady Grove. So many friends, and resident of Colfax, we could even say.
That's right.
Homegrown there. And very experienced counselor. Thank you for spending the time with us. I know when we talked, you said your schedule was very busy, so we really appreciate your time here today.
Thanks so much, Dan, for having me.